In 1960, 73% of American children lived in a home with two married parents, a working father, and a mother who stayed home. Today, that number is around 46%. And if you strip out the families who are actually thriving in that arrangement, the so-called Leave It to Beaver family, you're left with something far smaller. We are told constantly that the family is falling apart, that the values are gone, that something is wrong with us. But the family didn't fall apart. It was disassembled piece by piece, vote by vote, policy by policy, across a century of decisions most of us never read. This is the story of how America built the modern family and then forgot it was ever ours to begin with. To understand the family we lost, you have to start with the family we inherited. In 1900, the average American family was not the Leave It to Beaver household we keep returning to. It was bigger, often 3 generations under one roof, with grandparents, cousins, unmarried aunts, and hired hands all counted as family. A family that size didn't run on 2 incomes, because it didn't need to. It ran on labor. But the family you actually inherited, the legal one, the one written into law, was Victorian. It was a system called coverture. When a woman married, her legal identity was absorbed into her husband's. She could not own property in most states. She could not sign a contract. She could not, in many cases, sue for custody of her own children. The husband was, in the eyes of the law, the family. He was its public face, its legal voice, its wage. Between 1839 and the 1880s, a slow revolution happened. The Married Women's Property Acts passed state by state. By 1900, most American women could own property, sign contracts, and keep their own wages. It was a massive legal transformation. It was also, almost immediately, swallowed by the Gilded Age. The family at the turn of the century was a family in collision with the factory, with the tenement, with the new industrial economy that pulled fathers out of the home and put children into the mills. By 1900, 2 million American children worked in industry. The average work week was 60 hours. There was no Social Security, no unemployment, no health insurance, no minimum wage. If you got sick, your family took care of you. If you got old, your family took care of you. If you died young, your family buried you. There was no other system. The first great American welfare system was the family itself. And for a moment, a brief, dangerous moment, the federal government decided that wasn't good enough. In 1911, Illinois passed a law so radical that it would reshape the American family for the next 80 years. It was called the Mother's Pension. It was a cash payment, small, conditional, given to widowed or abandoned mothers so they could stay home and raise their children. It was the first time the American government said, out loud, the work of raising children is work, and we will pay for it. By 1920, 40 states had some version of a mother's pension. It was a mother's movement, a feminist, progressive, often eugenics-tinged movement that built the first American safety net. The assumption was simple. A family should be able to stay together. The state should help. Then the Depression hit, and everything changed. The New Deal. Franklin Roosevelt's response was not primarily a family policy. It was a labor policy. Social Security, 1935, was a workers' insurance program, and it deliberately excluded domestic workers and farm laborers, which meant it excluded most black Americans and most women. The Fair Labor Standards Act, 1938, created the 40-hour week and the minimum wage, and again, it excluded domestic and agricultural work. This was not an accident. It was the price of the New Deal coalition. White Southern Democrats would not vote for benefits that reached black workers. The family that the New Deal built was, in practice, a white family. Then came World War II and the second great reshuffling of the American family. With 16 million men in uniform, 6 million American women entered the workforce. Some built airplanes, some welded ships, some ran entire offices alone. Daycare centers mushroomed around military plants. The federal government subsidized them. The state, not the husband, not the church, took care of the children for the duration. And the government did something else too. In 1944, it passed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, the GI Bill. It was the largest middle-class construction project in human history. 8 million veterans got college tuition. 3.5 million got cheap home loans. The FHA and VA mortgages, government-backed mortgages, poured billions into a new kind of housing. The single-family suburban tract home, Levittown, Long Island, sold 10,000 of them in 1947 alone. The GI Bill didn't just build a new kind of house. It built a new kind of family. The nuclear family, father, mother, 2 kids, station wagon, white picket fence, was in the most literal sense government policy. To qualify for a VA loan, you had to be white. To qualify for an FHA loan, the neighborhood had to be white. That was the redlining system, codified by federal housing policy from the 1930s on. The American family we mythologized, the 1950s family, the Leave It to Beaver family, was not a natural return to traditional values. It was a policy product. It was a benefit, distributed unevenly, paid for by the federal government, and reserved in practice for white people. The 1950s are remembered as the family decade, and by some measures they were. The marriage rate hit an all-time high. The divorce rate hit an all-time low. The birth rate exploded. Between 1946 and 1964, 76 million babies were born in the United States, the largest demographic surge in American history. The economy cooperated. A single male wage in manufacturing especially could buy a house, a car, a college fund, and a family vacation. The federal tax code rewarded marriage and penalized single-earner households, locking the arrangement in. But the 1950s were not a golden age for everyone. The family wage was a white, male, union-protected wage. 40% of black families lived below the poverty line. For white families, it was around 10%. The Mexican-American Bracero Program, 1942 to 1964, imported hundreds of thousands of farm workers and explicitly excluded them from labor protections. Native American families were being broken up by federal policy into boarding schools. Japanese American families were barely out of internment camps, and the women in those 1950s families, the ones in pearls, in the kitchens, in the magazine ads, were drinking. A lot. They were also, as Betty Friedan would document in 1963, deeply, privately miserable. The phrase she coined, "the problem that has no name," described a phenomenon that would, within a decade, detonate the entire arrangement. But the family we remember, the Leave It to Beaver family, was, in another sense, never the dominant family. It was a template, a TV show, a magazine cover, a loan qualification, a tax bracket. And the policy that built it was about to collapse under its own weight. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 didn't just dismantle legal segregation. They exposed the family for what it had been, a system of inside benefits distributed by the state that had only ever been fully available to some Americans. The same decade brought the great legal revolutions of intimate life. In 1965, the Supreme Court ruled in Griswold v. Connecticut that married couples had a right to use contraception. In 1972, Eisenstadt v. Baird extended that right to the unmarried. In 1973, Roe v. Wade recognized a constitutional right to abortion. No-fault divorce arrived too, pioneered in California in 1969, copied by every state by 1985. The bar for ending a marriage dropped from adultery or abandonment to irreconcilable differences. Divorce rates doubled, then doubled again. The feminist movement of the 1970s, second-wave feminism, was not a war on the family. It was, in many ways, an extension of the same mother's pension logic from 1911. The work of running a household and raising children is real work, and it should be shared, or it should be paid, or it should be chosen. The Equal Pay Act, 1963, Title IX, 1972, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, 1978, these laws were not attacks on the family. They were changes to who could be considered the head of one. But here's the twist. The economic structure didn't follow. Even as women flooded into the workforce, the family economic model didn't change with them. Wages for men stagnated. Starting in the 1970s, the manufacturing jobs that had supported the single-earner family were leaving first to the Sun Belt, then to Mexico, then to China. The cost of housing, health care, and college exploded. By 1985, a single male wage could not, in most American cities, support a family. So the family changed anyway, but not because the work changed. Two incomes became a necessity, not a choice. Childcare costs rose faster than wages, and the policies that might have made the new family work: universal childcare, paid family leave, equal pay enforcement, livable wages, mostly didn't come. What did come in the 1980s and 90s was something else. In 1996, Bill Clinton, a Democrat, signed the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. Perora ended welfare as we knew it. AFDC aid to families with dependent children, the modern descendant of the 1911 Mother's Pension, was replaced with TANF, temporary assistance for needy families. Cash assistance became time-limited. Work requirements were mandatory. Marriage promotion was, briefly, federal law. The justification was the family. The result was the family, destroyed. TANF enrollment collapsed. Deep child poverty below half the federal poverty line, didn't drop. In some states it rose. Black children were the most affected. Their share of children in deep poverty actually grew. Single mothers, who had been the only category of poor family consistently supported by cash assistance since 1935, were now cut off. The 1996 law was passed during the same wave that produced the Defense of Marriage Act, a federal statute defining marriages between a man and a woman, signed by the same president. Both laws were framed as defending the family. Both, in practice, narrowed who could be in one. At the same moment, the carceral state was expanding. The 1994 crime bill, also signed by Clinton, funded the construction of state prisons and lengthened sentences. By 2000, more than 2 million Americans were incarcerated, overwhelmingly men, overwhelmingly Black and Latino. The ripple effects on families were enormous. An estimated 2.7 million children had a parent in prison or jail by 2008. Family separation, for poor families and families of color, was no longer a 19th century relic. It was a 20th century policy. The 21st century has not, despite a brief reprieve, repaired the family. It has accelerated its transformation. In 2010, the Affordable Care Act extended health coverage to 20 million more Americans. For families, that was the biggest single expansion of the safety net in decades. In 2013, the Supreme Court struck down the heart of DOMA. In 2015, Obergefell v. Hodges made marriage equality the law of the land. The family, in its legal sense, was finally open to everyone. But the economic family kept fracturing. Housing costs have roughly doubled since 2000 in real terms. In 1985, the median house cost about 2.6 times the median income. By 2023, it cost more than 5 times. Childcare now exceeds the cost of in-state college tuition in most states. The U.S. remains the only wealthy country in the world with no federal paid family leave. The 2021 expanded child tax credit briefly halved child poverty in the United States. It was a 6-month experiment. Congress let it expire. The pandemic did something stranger. Remote work pulled mothers out of the workforce. Disproportionately 400,000 women left in the first year alone. The she-cession hit the family harder than the Great Recession did. As of 2024, the prime-age female labor force participation rate still hasn't fully recovered. Meanwhile, the share of American adults who have never been married is at a record high. The share of children living in single-parent homes is around 23% and rising. Multi-generational households, which had been declining for a century, are now growing again, driven by cost, not culture. The family we are building now is, in many ways, returning to the family we inherited in 1900. A household held together by labor, not by law. We didn't lose the family because of any one thing. We didn't lose it because of divorce, or feminism, or atheism, or the breakdown of values. We lost it because we stopped paying for it. Every country in the world has a family policy. Some are generous, some are punitive. The American policy, for most of the last century, was a household wage, a job that paid enough to support a family, given mostly to one demographic, in a narrow window. When that wage disappeared, the family that depended on it disappeared with it, and the policies that might have replaced it, universal child care, paid leave, housing as a right, health care as a right, never arrived. The question of what to do about the family is not a cultural question. It is a policy question. It is a question about money and time and who pays for the work of raising children and who doesn't. The family we forgot was the family we built. and the family we build next, if we choose to, is the one we will have to pay for.